Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 4 of Friday with Friends. Today, I have Tyler here, who's a new friend. I met him on LinkedIn. And as someone that's interested in product management, I am so excited to have him on because I don't know if you've seen, but on LinkedIn, there's not a lot of people that have done product management internships and been so young doing product management. And he's already in it. So, very happy to have him here. Tyler, can we just start with a bit about your upbringing, your high school experience, and maybe your career interests at the time?
Yeah, sure. So, just a bit about myself. And first of all, thanks, Wynette, for inviting me on. It's always cool to get a platform to speak to someone about this. But upbringing wise, born in Toronto, Canada, parents are Filipino, immigrated over here. High school wise, went to a small, all boys Catholic school called Chaminade. It was a really unique experience. Honestly, learned a lot of really great lessons there. And then in terms of education, went to York University for business. And yeah, it was a really good experience and got to learn a lot there. And now I'm a rotational product manager at Zynga. So that's about me, very short wise, but I'm sure we'll dive into how each one of those experiences influenced me. But at a glance, yeah, that's what I'm all about.
What were your hobbies like in high school? Did you do any extracurriculars? Were you a
Um,
creative? Were you into school?
I think one of the things that I will say is that I tried everything. So I was part of the hockey team there. I was part of the math club. I was part of theater. Anything or anyone that would let me be part of their club, I would try to do it. And I wouldn't say that I was great at any of them. If anything, I was really average at a lot of them. But what I did understand is that I like trying new things. I like being put in situations where, it gets a bit uncomfortable. But that honestly, in some capacity, I think translated to the career I'm in now. But yeah, pretty much any club that I could get my hands on. I even did Model United Nations at one point. But yeah, it was a really cool experience. I got to do a lot of things in high school. So yeah.
Nice. I was trying to join our school's Model UN, but there actually weren't enough people interested, so I never got to do that. But it always looks fun on TV.
Yeah, I mean it's super fun. I will say sometimes you almost pinch yourself where you go it's kind of silly that we're acting as delegates of specific countries and there were always really weird conversations that happened during those delegations, but I mean yeah, it was a lot of fun and I think being part of it in some capacity was always awesome.
Question number 2. What led you to do your BBA at Schulich? I don't think I've actually interviewed anyone that has gone to Schulich yet.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I will say that I think there are a lot of factors that influence people to go in a specific direction. When I was in high school, I was part of something called the STEM program, which was basically science, technology, engineering, mathematics. And it's kind of out of left field to go into business when you've been raised up doing STEM-based courses. To be frank, I think there were two major influences. One was family friends. So I had friends from family, and you know how the aunties speak when they're talking about their kids, saying, and Schulich was a big name. So I always thought it was a really cool place to go to. And I won't lie, I was influenced by some of those family politics, I'm sure a lot of people are. But I think the second thing was I actually read a book called Shoe Dog, and the person who made it, which was Phil Knight, really focused on the idea of creating businesses, allowing him to go to different places and travel. And that book was so inspirational. And I thought it was my calling to switch over to business. Being in tech now, I will say the one thing I would advise people to do is that business can always be learned at another point in life. I think learning technical skills is great. And I won't make that dissuade from people who want to go strictly into business because that's always an avenue. But knowing myself now and applying to what I know now, I would definitely say that that might have not been my first choice. But I'm still in the position that I wanted to be. So yeah, that's kind of how I got to Schulich and what I think about it now that I've gone through the whole gamut.
Yeah, awesome. And we'll dive deeper into that because as an aspiring PM, I always have the question of whether I should have done a technical undergrad or if I need to go back to school or do a coding boot camp or learn certain, data skills. So happy you
Yeah.
brought that up. Question number 3, in business school, the two most traditional and promoted paths are finance and consulting. What drove you to pursue something as niche as product management? Was there a spark?
I think there is. Like I think the rough answer is there was a lot of things I tried that I either didn't like or I was not good at. And I think that's like my major suggestion to a lot of people is even if you are given an opportunity that you don't think you like, what it gives you is a data point to understand what you may like or what you want to like pivot into. Um, so even before I started doing product internships, what I actually did a bunch of internships in other places. So I worked at like P&G in sales. I did like project management and then worked for a startup and like marketing. And I did all these things and realized that I didn't like any one of them. Again, with like consulting and iBanking, I knew iBanking actually wasn't going to be a route for me. I had friends that like tried to tell me that I wanted to do it, but I personally didn't find any fixation on it, which was like completely fine. And I think it's fine for anyone to believe that as well. And consulting, to be fair, like I did go through the strenuous like recruiting process, but honestly, like if I'm being frank with myself, I probably wasn't the best consultant. And that's because like I love learning about niche domains and like burrowing my head into that like specific industry. So tech was that for me. In terms of a spark, I remember talking to one of my friends, someone that I met on LinkedIn, and I just want to know about their story because I entered at really cool places. And they were saying that, other than being a software engineer, being a PM is also a really cool role. And, looking into it, it ticked off a lot of the boxes. And I did my research and talked to a bunch of people. And I remember telling all my consulting friends that I wanted to do that. And they thought it was kind of crazy. But I had my conviction to go in that domain and that realm. And I'm pretty happy that I chose it because now I get to do what I enjoy and like enjoy a bunch of other benefits and perks as a result of that. But it definitely wasn't as glorious as it seemed, like trying to get my break. And that's the one thing that I kind of convey is like a lot of people want to be PMs, but there's a lot of work that goes into it. That's not to dissuade anyone to say that they can never be a PM, but just saying like the road isn't as easy as like waking up the next day and being like, oh, I want to be a PM.
Yeah, and thanks for that point because I think the route to become, let's say, an iBanker or management consultant, although it's very competitive, I think it's well documented and quite straightforward. First internship, maybe try and get any job at the bank. Second, maybe middle office. Third, okay, that's your front office summer. But yeah, product management, like I think there's just not a lot of info on that. It's a newer space, so I'd love to learn more about that. The next one, hopefully you can remember. Could you briefly share your entire internship and full-time journey so far? I don't think I've ever seen like a profile with as many experiences as you.
Yeah. Okay. So wait, I want to caveat and say that a lot of the reason I was able to get a lot of internship experiences is because I took a year off from school, and some schools do not allow you to do that. And I feel very privileged that I found a way to be able to fit that into my university journey. But just going over a couple things in first year, internships were a big deal. I feel like every kid wanted an internship in first year. I was so old school. Like I literally printed out my resume and went to local businesses and like slid them under people's doors. And one called me back for a project management experience, and that's what I ended up doing. The next year, I actually had an internship that got canceled on me, and I signed up for like a local internship matching program that one of the school clubs at my university offered. So I worked at a sustainable brand or sustainability brand for clothing. Worked there as like a strategy intern. And then after that, big break was in my third year. Got to Procter and Gamble. Thought it was endgame, and was like really excited to just do that. And I think a lot of people at my university think like a place like P&G is endgame, which it completely can be. But for me, like I wasn't necessarily enjoying it. And I even remember vividly talking to my manager saying like, I thought this is where I wanted to be and I'm not enjoying it. Like, what do you think I should do? And they were like, you should probably take a risk while you're still young. And I really appreciated that advice because I feel like a lot of people will like, cheerlead their company, but this manager in particular really took the time to just say, hey, like, what do you want as a person? And I took that to heart. And that's when I took the year off. So I then got my first PM internship at ClearGo, and it was definitely really hard to break in. And then after that, I was like, if I can do this, then maybe I could take the full year off and just ride product management internships until my final year. So then I did Loblaw Digital as a, PM. And then after that, went to a place called Barwell, which I really enjoyed. And then went to MLSC, and then I interviewed for full time and got really like lucky and really happy that I got Zynga. So yeah, that's where I'm at now and kind of like the full journey in a nutshell based on like jobs and professional experience.
You have a bunch of experience in different industries. Now, I'd love to know, does the role of a PM differ drastically from industry to industry?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think a lot of people have the disposition that every place that does product does it similarly. And I would say that there are two factors or two dimensions that influence the course of work that you do. Actually, maybe three. So the first thing is actually the domain in which you work in. So for example, whether you work as a growth PM or just a regular product manager or a technical product manager, your role will vary dependently on each one of those factors. So for example, a growth PM may be more experimentation focused, while a regular PM may be focused on feature development. The second thing that I would say is probably what the company's culture is like. Some company cultures are heavily dependent or heavily influenced to take a particular route when it comes to product development. So, for example, like Airbnb is notorious for having a very focused on design and design principles, while somewhere, for example, like a place like Blah Digital was like really data oriented, which is a great thing if that's what your industry or product placement optimizes for. And then the last thing I would say is your team. So your team, for example, might have a specific way in which they go about it or a specific way of work in which they're focusing on. And that's something to take into consideration. So all those three factors will determine how you are as a PM. My recommendation is you try to mix and match as many variables as possible. Granted, if you're given the opportunity to, so that way you can find out like which combination of things you like the best. But yeah, short answer or long answer to a short question that could be summarized is yes, it is different across industries.
Maybe briefly, could you share the difference in being a PM at a big tech company, let's say FANG, versus a startup?
Sure. Okay, so I will say I loved both experiences. And I really think it's up to you and what stage and what you want from your career. Some people optimize for things like, getting that experience right away so they can have validation to do more things and have more freedom in it. But in short, for my personal experiences, the things that I will say, and these are pretty objective, is that your scope of work is completely different. So, for example, at maybe a startup, maybe you'll be in charge of the whole feature cycle or maybe a whole specific page. While at a larger company, maybe you're hyper optimizing for a specific metric or probably like a section on a page, for example. Second thing is I would say like process. So there is like different processes that may take place. So for example, in bigger tech companies, you might have to go through due diligence and go through law and go through like different, you know, um, different domains that are like being affected by your changes. And it's important that you coordinate. And that's why I think like stakeholder management becomes so much more important at a larger level. Where at a startup, for example, like I've had times where, the person that I need to get approval from is like right next to me and I can just talk to them, which in itself is both a good thing and a bad thing, depending on how you want to optimize or look at the situation. And then I think the last thing is, in terms of like larger tech companies opposed to smaller ones, the one thing that I will say is like the team is obviously going to be very different as well, right? So, for example, a larger tech company, you may have the luxury of having like a data analyst and a data scientist and all these people you get to work with. While at smaller tech companies, maybe you wear that hat and you act as a data analyst or a data scientist, and it's fun. Like I will say, like there are times where maybe you have too many roles on your plate, but in some capacity, I really do like that. But both roles have taught me a lot that I'm encompassing into the way I grow as a PM now. But overall, yeah, they're both really valid experiences.
And why do you think it's so hard for university students or new grads to break into product management early into their career? Is it the fact that there's just not a lot of jobs available? Or is it because a lot of people come from consulting and really cut their teeth over there until they're, I don't know, more refined and more skilled and then go into PM?
Yeah, that's a super interesting question. I think there are like so many macro and micro factors that go into that, and I don't want to sound too businessy when I say that, but like the one thing that I will say is that when you go into consulting, like I don't know if you've ever seen or like iBanking recruitment, the domain of students or like the people and their specialties is primarily focused in that field. So like for example, it's kind of rare to see like maybe like a software engineer by trade go into consulting, right? Like sometimes you see that and you're like, wow, like that's a crazy combination. But what I will say is that like in product management, it's like kids from software engineering and kids from design and kids from business and kids from like like other places or other specific interests. And I think that's beautiful because it makes the field so diverse in its thought. And I think that's what makes it really special. But it also makes it hyper competitive because a lot of these RPM and APM programs have like 6 or 5 slots or 4 slots. Like I saw Figma open their first APM application, and I think they're taking 1 kid, which is like insane to me. That's what it's like. It's really interesting because I talk to a lot of like mentors and people that have been in product for a really long time, and they like wonder how like this field got to its hyper competitive state. What I will say is like there are a lot of things you can do to help differentiate yourself. But one thing that I wish I could tell myself back then, and what I wish I could tell kids now, and I'm doing so through this video, is that like there are a lot of factors at play that you cannot control, and that's completely fine. As long as you maximize your opportunities or maximize the ability to be seen as much as possible, then you can't really regret not being chosen for something that you couldn't control. And I think that's super important to recognize. So I hope like that's a major takeaway. But yeah, that's kind of one of the reasons why I think it's super hyper competitive now.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that. Like, yes, there, iBanking and management consulting is competitive, but at the same time, like every single bank will take like 20 or 30 kids each summer, and most of them do come from a business stream. But yeah, you're right. Like designers, engineers, and oh my gosh, I can't believe there was only one spot for that role. That's insane. And even like the APM programs at big tech companies, like don't they only take a handful as well?
Yeah, I mean, like I don't know the actual numbers. Like I can tell you at Zynga it was like 6 kids, and they're all really talented people. Like I've met all of them, and they're all really talented and super smart people. And that's why I say like it's not the only way to get into product. Like there are people that start their own companies or go work for a startup or find a more non-traditional route and move over cross-functionally. And I think that's kind of the great thing is that a great product manager can come from anywhere as long as you hone in on a specific skill and be super, product centric when it comes to your thinking. But yeah, I knew I knew in my third year that I really wanted to do this, and none of the other things made sense for me. So I kind of really put all my eggs in one basket, and it just so happened to hatch. And I'm very happy about that. But I don't think that has to be everyone's way of going about it, and nor should it be.
You already kind of touched on this, but true or false, nearly all PMs come from a STEM background.
No. Okay, so like that's false, but it's something that my opinion on that subject or that like myth has continued to develop. I don't think PM should come from a technical background, but I think they should in some capacity develop some technical prowess. And what I mean by that is I don't think everyone who sits at the table should have some sort of characteristic. But what I believe is that if you do sit at the table, you should have some background to understand what you're speaking at the table. And for me, like coming from a non-technical background, like I was super scared about that. And what I did to make up for it is like just read a bunch of textbooks and understand what was going on behind the scenes when it came to the technologies that I love on a daily basis. So understanding, for example, like everyone uses the example like an API, like what is an API? Or for example, like understanding like what is the system design that goes into so many of the applications that we use on a daily basis. And I think some of them are really interesting topics. Like one thing that I was talking about with a buddy is like, what is a system design for Tinder? Like, I think it's incredibly interesting that a lot of people use this app on a daily basis, but don't even know how they're matched with different people. And I think that's really interesting. So just having that type of curiosity can carry you a long way and you learn something at the same time. But yeah, in some capacity, I think PM should be technical, but I don't think that has to come from a STEM background. So yeah, I'll say it's false.
I heard that certain companies, some of them prefer PMs to come from a more technical background or some from business background. Maybe background is the wrong word, but have a business sense, more technical sense. Could you provide more color on that? Did I understand that correctly?
Yeah, like I think so. I've had the pleasure to work with a wide array of PMs, and what's great about that is like I have like a pretty decent amount of data points to kind of validate or invalidate that claim. So I would say that that again is false because I've met people that have come from like various backgrounds. Sorry, like one person came from filmmaking, which I thought was really cool. Some person came from like TV production. Like these are just people. The common trait amongst all these people is that they're either really sharp in one domain, whether it be like analytics, design, or like business, but they all have really good consumer empathy. And I think that's like super important to have, regardless of what type of background you come from. So yeah, I would say like it's not a necessary point. I've seen a lot of people like crossover, for example, from sales and just like go over to product. And like I think that's awesome. Like I think there should be as many diverse minds at the table because at the end of the day, you have to triangulate as many opinions to ensure that the customer's thoughts and values are put into a product's, basis in terms of its development. So yeah, I think you don't have to come from a specific place.
This is a bit of a random outlier question, but from speaking to some PMs, I heard it's better to ship first and then, gather your data, make edits. Is that true across like many different companies? Is that like a very baseline philosophy to have in product management?
It's interesting. I would say like in some ways it's true, in some ways it's not. And the reason why I say that is like I think a lot of people think when you roll something out, it's very binary. So for example, like I'm going to launch a product. Okay, everyone now sees this product. But what a lot of these big companies do, and startups do this extremely well if they have the infrastructure in place, is they actually roll out the product to a couple eyes and then get a test. So imagine it's like you have a group of 10 people and then you take two people and put a curtain in between those two people and the eight people and you show those two people like, hey, this is the product that I'm going to show you, do you like it? And they go like, oh yeah, like I fuck with that, like that's really good. So then you say, okay, based on that data, I think we can probably like, show this to the rest of the eight people, but let's not do it right away. So we'll show it to the next three people in line. So now five people have seen it and two people now go, hey, like I don't like this and I don't like that. And it's up to you, the product manager, to validate if that point deserves or warrants a feature like change. And then after that, you'll test it with the remaining people. And the hope is that once you roll it out to 100%, everyone's fine and happy and the product can be successful and do well. So the question is kind of hard because if you don't take into account that edge case, then yeah, like, you don't roll it out right away. But in some capacity, there is truth to that. So I'm going to say it's like a 50-50 in terms of truth and lie, but that's kind of the way that I think most product places go about it.
Oh, thanks. I haven't heard that before, but it does make sense. And now I'm thinking back to some of my favorite apps, and I'm realizing that I was part of the test subject and the test group because I'm like, oh, hey, did you see that? Wealthsimple rolled a venture fund, and they're like, no, I didn't. But why did I get chosen? Probably because I engage in the app so much and I make regular deposits. So yeah, that's cool to understand. Question number 5. Why do you think product management vlogs and content are becoming so popular on TikTok and YouTube?
So I don't think it's product management specifically, but what I will say is I think it's like more so content that's focused around tech. And I think it's like a double-edged sword because I think it's great to celebrate careers and show them off, but I think a lot of them like glamorize like the specific parts of it that are really great. At the end of the day, like, a job's a job, and I think you can enjoy a job and you can learn a lot from it. But I think I wouldn't over-index and say like that base experience that you're showing off, similar to like when you go on Instagram and see your friend like going on vacation, is the everyday case or scenario when you're at that job. So I think it's popular because a lot of people like to see these cool things and be like, oh my God, it's awesome that Google has a slide. But just understand that like the slide is there, for like, cool reasons and stuff like that. But those people are working just as hard as they're playing, which I think is also a really good distinguishing factor that people should take into account. So yeah, and I also think there are other fields that are really popular. I just know that like when I was getting into product, I would search up day in the life of a PM so I could understand what was going on in their lives and if I'd want to enjoy it. But I've also seen just as many like day in the life of iBankers, day in the life of like consultants. I think it's probably just like what a lot of people do to kind of see if they even want to be in a career like that. And I find those videos to be very valuable for that reason.
Yeah, and I remember I made a vlog when I was working at AWS, and yeah, it looked fun, but I think one important thing is to know that you can actually film your work for legal and compliance reasons as well. So you're really just seeing me go out to lunch or hang out with my coworkers. So I think it can definitely give you an understanding, but seeing like the colorful walls or the comfy chairs, as you said, the slides, maybe the free food, that's cool and all, but at the end of it, it is a job, and tech can be so stressful as well. Like it's like I think some people think that in tech you work less or you don't even work for some reason, like consultants and iBankers, but it is very stressful. It's super competitive. And I remember that like there were new certifications all the time that even non-technical people had to be certified in.
Yeah, I mean, like it really depends on what you want to do with your career and kind of like where you want to develop. I mean, like learning is going to be strenuous in any capacity, right? Unless like things come to you like this, which like unfortunately, like I am not in that domain. I wish I was, but I think like there are times where, things are gonna, not be ideal, but it's up to you to kind of approach or how you see those things. Like learning is going to be like that, or growing is like that. It's like there's thing called growing pains, right? So yeah, I think it's really important to understand that that comes in every job. The intensity of what that is dependent on how you approach it and also the field that you're in. But yeah, like I still enjoy tech regardless of the things that happen in terms of like developing and kind of going through those growing pains.
Now, I think there's so much talk about, what a good PM looks like. Like, you got to be good with people, have some technical abilities. But maybe could you talk about the challenges of being in product management? Are there things that maybe an outsider wouldn't be aware of? Is there a lot of stakeholder management? You have to balance people's opinions, or there are trade-offs, there's limits. Like, could you talk a bit more about maybe the challenges that we don't know?
Sure. I mean, like I can go into challenges that like I've developed as someone who's gone through the field. Um, I think the first thing is, just having influence without authority. And I think that's like a big thing a lot of people quote. I can talk to this specifically about the internships I've done before, but being a new PM and kind of working with engineers, luckily like all the engineers I've worked with have actually been amazing and great. But it's kind of just feeling a little bit awkward at first in terms of like talking and trying to tell them like this is the way that we should go about it for X, Y, and Z reason. And what I try to do is try to give everyone equal stakes at the table so that way like everyone's opinions feel valid. But regardless, like sometimes it's just awkward to facilitate that conversation. Second thing I would say is like just being able to synthesize all the data that you're doing and not trying to have like a data overload or analysis paralysis. I think this is something I'm still trying to get good at right now. It's just like having that intuition to understand like what is needed data, what's data that I don't necessarily have confidence in, and is there any way that I can bring out a story from the information I've pulled that is concise, easy to understand, and also something that I can prove. So that would be like the second thing. And then probably the third thing is, and this is I think more so like a thing that I'm experiencing just because like I'm becoming an adult and like understanding how to do stuff is balance time. As a PM, like no one's gonna force you to, work extra hours. But I feel like a lot of PMs have that type A personality where like if they don't solve something, they're gonna keep like going at it until they can solve it. And sometimes that can be unhealthy because like after work you still like take a couple swings at the problem and you still don't get it. And it can be infuriating because I was like that in university. If I don't have a problem that I can solve, I'm going to like bed at 3 a.m. because I'm like still scratching and clawing like all the notes I can get to like be able to solve a problem that I can't do. So having that healthy boundary, I think, is really important. I'm still working on it and trying to understand it. And there are some nights where like I look back and I'm like, maybe I should have just like got to sleep so I could look at the problem with fresh eyes. But overall, like I think those are things that I've either encountered in the past or like going through right now that maybe not a lot of people know about.
What are PM interviews like? Like, I heard so many stories. Is it like consulting? Is it even more particular?
Okay, so I think this is why I was really bad at consulting interviews was because like the rigidness of consulting interviews is like you do question one and you do question two and then like you get a math problem and then you summarize and present. I think in product management interviews, there are two style of interviews. There are more rigid ones, which are like metric based. So like, why does XYZ metric do and how would you troubleshoot it? Or like, what metrics would you define? And those kind of have objective answers, right? Like if you're saying like, what is the most important metric for a thing like YouTube? And you say something, for example, like the amount of signups, then objectively you could say maybe that's not the best metric opposed to something like watch time, right? And even then you can poke holes in that and say like, is watch time really valuable if watch time isn't meaningful, right? Like someone just has it running in the background. But there are those type of questions, and then there are the second type of questions, which are my favorite personally, which are product design questions. And it's the best way I like to describe it is like imagine you had those like weird conversations with your friends, where it's like I wish someone made a product for like XYZ people, and I get to do that as like interview questions, and I find that to be particularly fun. There's a specific way to go about it, but generally like those are the questions you'll fall under. And then depending on the company culture, if they're more technical or not, we'll focus on things like system design, estimation questions, stuff like that. But for the most part, the bread and butter is usually metrics, some function of product design. and then maybe some sort of like leadership question to assess like how you would work in a group or work with specific people.
Let's say a student from Schulich has a PM interview in 2 weeks. They haven't done like a PM internship before, but maybe they've done strategy ops, maybe some data roles. How
Sure.
best should they prepare? Because that is a wide scope of questions.
Sure. I mean, like I could just recommend resources. I feel like the biggest thing is like Exponent. Exponent has like a lot of mock interviews and like walkthroughs that I think are really valuable and have a lot of great practices. Second thing I would say is like read the product manager or cracking the PM interview. I think that's really important. And also a book called The Sacred Seven, which is written by the same people who wrote that book. I think those two resources in themselves can take you a really far way. The third I would say is like just continue to read up on things like TechCrunch and like product hunt to be able to understand like how people are thinking about product. I think that's really important. Same way in like in consulting or iBanking, you would read like the news and make sure that like, finding out what trends are going on in the world. Same thing goes for tech, I believe. Um, and then last thing is just like mock with people. I think like a lot of people like sound really smart in their head, and I know I feel that way a lot of the times. And then they speak and they hear themselves over and they're like, damn, like that did not sound how I wanted it to sound. So speaking out to somebody and someone you trust is a great way to be able to hear those flaws or differences, and then make corrections as a result. So that's a lot of what I did. So I would say like if you could do that in 2 weeks, that's great. If you have more time, you can even get even better. But that's like my formula for doing well.
You mentioned how you were lucky to break into PM, having an internship, you took a gap year and your school allowed for that. How does one break into product management so early into their careers when there are so few roles? We talked about your path, but do you suggest that people go and do 2 years of consulting, or is strategy and ops a good way to start? What are the different routes?
So I think like the thing I would assess is where you are in the current time, which you make the decision that you'd like to pursue PM. If you're in first year, like try other industries first that are product adjacent, and then use that as leverage to say that your narrative is that you'd now like to launch into product. So for example, if let's say you're in, and let's take a more untraditional route. Let's say like you took like design at OCAD, right? Not to say that's like non-traditional, but usually people come from like software engineering, right? So I would say, okay, so do a product design internship. Maybe you could learn how to do like web design, and then after you could leverage that and say, I love all of these factors, but XYZ is missing, which I think is fulfilled by product. So it's like one way. I think the second way would be like if you're able to do internships later into your career that are PM specific and then leveraging that to get a full-time offer. And then the third way would be like more product adjacent roles. So for example, any like business function or any like technical function like software engineering or even design could cross paths. It's very similar to being in like first year and like getting those internships, but instead you're going to leverage that internally and say, hey, like I've been doing sales at XYZ company, and let's say it's something like LinkedIn, and say, hey, like I've noticed like these inefficiencies in the product, and I've been really keen on listening to like consumer insights and using that to be able to bring this feedback to you. I know there are some like gaps in my knowledge, but I think foundationally I have a lot of what it takes to be a good PM. And I'd love to do PM work for free if you'd let me, but I just want to let you know my interest and be clear about it. And I think a lot of companies would really love, I mean, like it's free work, obviously, but you got to get your, you got to like get that elbow grease a little bit to be able to break into product. And I know like I did the exact same thing. Like I wasn't in a full-time role, but I would do like, slide decks and PRDs and send them out to a bunch of people and just like get their opinions and, get some eyes on my profile as a result of that. So yeah, I think like those are probably the three most common ways. But regardless, like there are probably some like edge cases or maybe some like permutations of those ways that I haven't explored or haven't seen, but those are probably the most popular.
I'm starting out in sales. I know that a lot of entry level, like recent grads, also start out in sales. Do you think, you mentioned it a few times, but do you think it's possible to be in sales for a bit, listening to customers, hearing what they have to say, and then breaking into products like right away? Or is there usually like another lateral in between the two?
I've seen people go from sales to product right away. I just think that it's dependent on if your company has either done it before, which gives you like a green light to say like this is possible, or for example, like depending on the product, like what the PM does in the company. So for example, like if you're on an extremely technical product, like let's say you're on like, I don't know, like a back end like SaaS service, right? It might be harder as a PM or a salesperson to become a PM because there are just some things that maybe you haven't been exposed to. But showing
Mhm.
that interest still, I think, can make a big difference about whether you break into product or not. Right. So it's all about, I think, and these are things that I think are then outside the scope of what I've experienced, but like just making sure your intentions are known, understanding where you fall between you and your manager and your development plan, and kind of just like letting those things be known. But yeah, it's definitely possible. I've seen people go from sales to product, and I think it's a great avenue that a lot of people could take. It's just depending on if you want to do it and if you're in an environment that allows you to do it.
I'm sure some viewers are even more interested and curious on learning more about product management. Could you tell viewers a bit about your newsletter resource, Tyler Talks product?
So I'll pitch it, and then if you'd like to subscribe to it, you can subscribe to it. But one thing that I realized in product management is I think either a lot of people find it late, they are really scared to break into it because they have a lot of those myths, like thinking people need to be technical. And the third thing is that their school doesn't even support them in finding out about these industries, especially if they're more traditional, like going to things like iBanking and consulting, which again, there's nothing wrong with that. So what I wanted to do is create a centralized hub where I basically demystified, like made things a lot simpler and kind of just explored topics that I feel are a little more taboo and that people don't want to talk about more openly or are kind of scared to do so. So that way people are able to, understand product better and then hopefully break into it and be confident in doing so. So that's what Tyler Talks product is about. So people from non-traditional backgrounds reading about fundamental things in product that aren't openly explored. And then what's even great about it is you can actually get free coffee because I have a coffee program at the bottom of the page. So if you read it early enough and click into it, there's a Starbucks gift card at the bottom. If you are one of the first couple readers, I think it gets used up pretty quickly now that the newsletter's grown a little bit. But I try my best to give back not only in content, but also in coffee. And also it's good for me because there's a positive association then between you drinking coffee and my newsletter, which I think is pretty valuable. So yeah, if you'd like to subscribe to it, please do. If you don't, my feelings aren't hurt, but there is some good content that you can, read and stuff like that. So yeah, that's my pitch for, trying to read that newsletter.
Yeah, and I'm subscribed, but I never got to the coffee point yet, but I will keep on trying. Now, last question here. What's next for you? You are an RPM right now at Zynga. Do you hope to like become a founder one day?
That's a hard question. I feel like this is a version of like what you doing in 5 years from now. And I think like the question that I have at a very, very um inexperienced and unbeknownst 23 years of living is like vocationally, what do I want to do in life? And it's really introspective to ask myself at this stage. But I don't know. Like I've always been really fascinated with communication and socializing. And I think we're at a really interesting age where like the dawn of socialization has moved towards like larger and larger like social spheres. So like when you were on Facebook for the first time, on Instagram, it's like, yo, like I got to get my like count up, I got to get my followers up. But now it's like people want smaller and smaller social circles, but they want more meaningful interactions. So it's almost like this anti-social media age, which I think is like super cool and fascinating. And I'd love in some capacity to contribute to the way that people socialize in a more meaningful way. Hopefully in some way be able to do that. Zynga is doing a really great job of helping me understand what it means to make great product. So yeah, maybe in some distant future, I'm making some social tools to allow people to interact better. Um, Maybe in some capacity, I'm aiding current companies in doing that. But regardless, I'm just trying to enjoy the journey. Like I try to like live in the moment as much as possible, and I'm trying to do that without looking too far ahead. But if I get to daydream for like 5 seconds, I think that's where my head's going. So yeah, I think that would probably be where I would want to go.
One of my favorite social medias, I'm not on Instagram or Snapchat, but one of my favorite is Be Real because
No, I love Be Real. I
yeah,
love Be Real.
yeah, it goes exactly with the philosophy you were talking about. It's like
Yeah.
meaningful connections. And I actually bumped into somebody today at a coffee shop that I haven't seen in a long time, but I have this person on Be Real. So I was like, oh, like I see that you're studying and oh, you have a job interview. Like, congratulations. And yeah, like I think that's a great product. It's a demonstration of smaller, meaningful circles, but it's still online.
Yeah, and there are so many social conventions that I think a lot of people aren't aware of. Like I always talk to my friends about this, but like, why is it considered a lot if someone posts like too many times on Instagram? Like, I think we all have that disposition. It's like, let's not post too much because I don't want to spam people. But that's so like artificial to me that
Yeah.
people have made these like rules, and it's crazy that like we all universally understand these rules. And I love Be Real for the reason that everyone posts once a day, or like three if you post exactly at the time. And
Hmm.
I get to see what my friends are doing at the exact moment. And if they like, for example, wait to post a bit later, then like so be it. But I try to keep my followings as small as possible. Even on Instagram, like I don't even post on Instagram as much. I'll like post a story once in a while. But yeah, I think that's like really interesting that as a generation that's grown up with social media, we all have these like universally known rules. So the question is like, are we going to keep these rules? Are we going to change them and alter them? Or are we going to write new ones? And for the people that do write new ones, I'd like to, in some capacity, be part of that writing list. So that would be really cool.
Yeah, and I definitely think, as someone Gen Z and understanding these rules, but also craving more close social connection, I would love if there were new rules written, because I think that's such a big gap right now. And not to go on a tangent, but there's so many videos and artists that talk about like
Yeah.
loneliness, even though you
Oh my
have so
God,
many
yes.
followers.
I literally yeah, I've literally seen so many dude, I feel like okay, post COVID, there's so many people that are like, I have such a hard time meeting people like after university. And it's like crazy to me that this is a universal problem that people are like, oh, I have a hard time meeting friends, and like we're in probably like the peak of socializing. Maybe like university was pretty close, but I would assume that your early 20s would be close to that, and it just doesn't seem to be clicking as much. Um, Maybe it's me, but I feel like a lot of people also are having this problem. So yeah.
No, it's not just you. Like I am starting my early career, and I'm like, one of my biggest fears right now is like, how am I supposed to make friends? And it's so paradoxical because we do have social media, and even Bumble has its own friends feature, but I don't know, there's like these like rules as you were talking about. Like, is it weird to meet someone on Bumble? Like, and I think there is a market for something like that, because yeah, there I don't think like 23-year-olds should, one of the things on their mind all the time is, how am I going to make friends?
Yeah, yeah. And like it's weird because I think back in the day, like you would randomly just talk to people, but even that feels taboo, right? Like we're both
Yeah.
from like Toronto, and if you go on the TTC and talk to someone on the bus, like
Mm,
yeah, like you're taking an L right away, right? And like in some ways that's super sad, but like I think a lot of people like prioritize safety, and in some ways like a lot of those social conventions that maybe our parents grew up with are no longer, like applied to us anymore. So yeah, I think about that very consistently. Like, like where do you meet people? Like, do you join clubs? And then like if that's the case, like what clubs do you join? And like can that be the only basis of like how you connect with someone is through a club? Like what are more natural connections that aren't facilitated through common interests, or like more so during like sporadic interaction? And that sounds super dorky and nerdy to say, but like if you break it down into that, like language, then yeah, that's basically what's happening. So it's very interesting.
yeah, and I could go on and on about this, but just last point here, like I'm thinking about my best friend. There's no way we would have met through a club, because actually we don't have any common interests. We just
Yeah, yeah.
personalities just get along. So then I guess if you're making a product, it's like, can we just do it on superficial things about like what sports you like, or is it more than that? And how do we like code that and build that? What does it look
Yeah.
like?
Dude, then it becomes so interesting because it's like if you're making like a social media or like something like that, there are like common variables that you try to match people on, right? But then like social sciences and human behavior and human psychology is so sporadic, and it's what is it's not intentional. Like there are a lot of times where people say how they feel and that's not how they actually feel, and trying to like codify that is super hard. So that's why I'm always so fascinated by it, because it's legitimately like maybe it's like gambling for product managers like who are in the social field, but I don't know, it really like scratches my brain, and I think it gets me interested in like likes talking about this stuff. So yeah, I think it's super cool.
Yeah, well, thank you everyone for bearing with us for the last 5 minutes there with a
Yeah, yeah, I
little,
appreciate everyone listening.
yeah, little brainstorm there. Maybe, in the future, Tyler will have a product for us to solve this Gen Z loneliness. But until then, thank you so much, Tyler, for being on the pod. And make sure to subscribe to his newsletter, Tyler
Thank you.
Talks Products. And I will see you in episode 5 next week, when I have my friend Kenny Song, and he talks about studying kinesiology at McMaster. And now he has a million followers on TikTok where he makes cooking videos. So
That's
stay
pretty
tuned for
sick.
that.
That's pretty sick. All right, thanks for having me, Wynette.
Yeah, no problem. Bye, everyone.